All right, what's up, America? Time for another episode of Choir Practice. Bernie, you want to tell them all what choir practice is?
Choir practice is an age-old police practice where you get together after a shift to decompress, alcohol, coffee, but generally alcohol, and celebrate being together.
So I want to open by giving a little shout out to our boys over at Warrior 12. They know me pretty well. They sent their latest shirt. Since we're redefining everything now, this is a cordless hole puncher. Pretty accurate. I flew back into Connecticut a couple of days ago, was immediately angry because it's Connecticut, and all of my cordless hole punchers are now legal in Florida, but they are not legal here in Connecticut. So again, these guys know me well. So Warrior 12, thank you guys for always hooking us up. And a big shout out to my boy Don over at Minutemen Coffee, who keeps us all very well caffeinated. This is not a paid promotion. Well, he does give us free coffee, but it'd be really nice if he started giving us money instead. That shows you how much I really like the coffee. So Don, send more coffee and send money.
More mugs too.
And more mugs, because Bernie doesn't have one. So your turn. Who are you?
Kyle, I'm Sam Rosenberg, author of Live Ready. Also my company, Live Ready, and I'm from Pittsburgh. Spent a lifetime protecting people and organizations and teaching them how to protect themselves. Basically, short version, 1996, got out of the Marines, was a Marine officer, kind of landed in the close protection world. I always tell people it's a fancy pants way of saying bodyguarding. Protected a variety of folks from celebrities, dignitaries, to heads of state. Probably the highest profile people I protected were high-ranking members of the Israeli government, Netanyahu when he was the former prime minister, folks like Tom Cruise, Warren Buffett, stuff like that throughout the years. But in 2003, I had a philosophical shift that, to me, it's good to have a lifeguard, but ultimately you should know how to swim. So I sort of pivoted my career and started to teach people the same skills and tools that we use to protect public figures. 20 years, of that process of really teaching these skill sets for everyone from kids to Fortune 500s. And it's been an interesting journey, but I decided that, really my reach was only as far as I could get in front of people. And, that one of the things that I would hear quite constantly when I would do presentations is, how do I get my family to understand, these same concepts, these same principles? So I decided to write this book. There's a copy in here for you. I signed them for you and for Bernie and for Chris.
I'm sorry, can we pause for a second? Did you say you were the bodyguard for little guys like Tom Cruise, Netanyahu?
Well, we did protective details. So I protected, my teams, I should say, protected Tom Cruise when, he was filming one of his movies for about, it was about a 9-month period. And,
oh, wow.
And then, I protected Netanyahu when he was the former prime minister on a speaking tour. So it was a relatively short detail, but it was pretty high profile, pretty cool.
Okay, so let's talk about the times that we're in. What I like here is, right on the cover, it says, "A Guide to Protecting Yourself in an Uncertain World." You've got a forward from the legend, Grossman. One of the things that I've seen in my journeys on the border over the last few months, Texas, Arizona, is that, down there in states like that, you have Democrat sheriffs who are very pro-2A, which is very different than other parts of the country. Mm-hmm. And what these guys have all told me was, we are in an age with what we are seeing, Kyle, come over the border. We are in an age where everybody needs to be prepared for an uncertain world. Mm-hmm. So what is it that inspired that direction that you took this in?
Yeah, I've always wanted to write this book. For many years, sort of had been percolating on the content, and, it just coalesced. About 3 years ago, I decided to really sit down, put pen to paper, and really do it. I can tell you, one of my motivations was I wanted to make sure that the information that I have, the knowledge that I've attained over the years, the experiences, everything, that I could archive that in a way that someone as simple as my kids, could partake of this information if I get hit by a bus today. So in many ways, I wrote this book so that this information gets out into the mainstream. And I know that this audience here, we're dealing with the professional lifeguards of society, okay? So there's a couple of perspectives that I have with that. And I've done a lot of presentations to law enforcement from, executive organizations, law enforcement executives to, just municipalities. That one of the challenges there is, law enforcement is routinely seen as the experts by the general citizenry. And, how do you help them along? What do you tell them to do? Well, this is a tool in that toolbox. So from my standpoint, it's like when someone needs help and they need to learn how to protect themselves, how do you help them get the soft skills? This isn't going to teach you how to physically defend yourself, but it's a guide in terms of the situational awareness, the mindset, the soft skills of how to recognize danger, how to know when you're being targeted. If you're being targeted, how do you address it? How do you deal with sociopaths, psychopaths? All this stuff that has to be in the hands of just about every citizen today is in there. And the challenge that I've experienced is that even professional personal security trainers, and there's a lot of really good ones out there, a lot of them don't even know this material, let alone how to articulate it in a way that everyday people can understand it. And not only that, I wanted my law enforcement friends and my brothers, if you will, and my sisters to be able to give this book to their families so that they can help them along. So the concept is that what you're seeing on the border is no different than what we're seeing with, say, active shooter situations. Sure. Law enforcement, by and large nowadays, in many times for the first time in history, last few decades, really, saying to the private citizen, hey, we are not going to be there when you need us. You need to know how to protect yourself. And, it's a whole different ballgame now. And this to me is like the playbook. How do you go from 0 to 60 really fast?
Well, I do want to, anyone who was wondering, yes, he's a Marine, but no, it is not a picture book.
Right.
There's no cartoon.
Not like Bruce Tegner, the old Kung Fu books.
But, having
to flip it to watch him fight.
Crayons. But, I was flipping through earlier, and what I like about this, I didn't get super far into it yet, but it is very digestible, right? Mm-hmm. It's a very easy read. It's something that you don't have to sit there and read the whole book. You can pull nuggets of wisdom and information out of here, regardless of what your demographic is. And something you said, I think, is really important here, which is police officers, firefighters, EMTs, they are first responders, but first responder by definition just means the first person who arrives on the scene. Mm-hmm. And so myself, Brent, everyone else in here who's not law enforcement, you stumble upon that scene, you are the first responder. Yeah. And so the more education and knowledge that we can have as just regular citizens who care about keeping other people safe and protecting our own families, but the people around us, this is a great tool chest for that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And, the book is sort of, it navigates through some ideas, if you will, that I've come across over the, I've come to believe over the last 20 years. And there's these two interrelated ideas, if I can share kind of a perspective on this. The first idea is what I call the myth of helplessness, and the second is this idea, the myth of randomness. And, the myth of helplessness is kind of like, I think of it as the story of the elephant, right? How you train a circus elephant, okay? And the way they used to do it was they'd take a baby elephant when it's small and they'd chain it to a stake in the ground. And this little baby elephant would pull and pull on that chain until eventually it just gives up. And what this means is that when the elephant is fully grown and is the largest, most powerful land mammal on the planet, a human handler can lead it around on the end of a rope, and in the mind of the elephant, it's helpless to resist. This is the very definition, if you will, of what we would think of as learned helplessness. And I fundamentally believe that we have all been similarly conditioned. Even those of us who don't ever want to believe that, or we don't think about it on a regular basis, or have prepared ourselves for how to handle things, the conditioning is still to a degree there. That the people say to themselves, ordinary people say to themselves, well, the guy had a gun. How could anyone have done anything differently? It was a terrorist attack. If I'm not a law enforcement officer with armor and training in firearms, how could I possibly have responded to that? But the reality of it is that we are never helpless as long as we can control one factor, if that factor is our mind, our ability to think and make decisions under pressure. The challenge is that there's a lot of forces at play that make it very, very difficult to do that. And the benefit that law enforcement has, or the military has, is significant training in how to desensitize that and how to rewire that so that we don't freeze under pressure. But the average person, you talk to them and they say, well, I don't know what I would do. I would just panic. And what they're really saying is they would freeze. They don't have any ability to process. So this idea of systematically rewiring that and getting people over this threshold of feeling like they do not have the ability to perform if they're not a law enforcement officer or someone with significant training is the first step of this book. How do we actually get them to believe and to understand that they are fundamentally never helpless? And the second component to that is this idea of what I call the myth of randomness, which is that this notion that violence is random. Like people talk about it, the media, they'll say things like it was an act of random violence, or, people will use phrases like no one saw it coming or someone just snapped. But the reality is that violence is never random. It's a process, and it's a process as observable and predictable as boiling water if we know what to look for. And we have to be in a position to see the signs. So sometimes we could be at a concert or, an event or something like that and not be able to have those early warning signs. We didn't have the optic or the angle on it. But the idea here is that functionally speaking, when people say violence is random, what they are saying is it is therefore unpredictable. And if it is unpredictable, what possible responsibility do we have? And my belief is that because violence is a predictable process, you need the tools to know what to look for. You see signs that say if you see something, say something, but no one's telling you what the hell specifically to look for. Right. So the concept is, how do you really make yourself a part of the solution, not only for your own personal security, but by virtue of enhancing your own security? How do you become, how do you enhance the security of all of us as a nation, as a society, as communities? These ideas are woven throughout here, and we address every gamut of it, from persuasion predators that might target, kids or teenage girls, or kids going into college, to, some of the most dangerous creatures out there, whether they're sociopaths, psychopaths, or whether we're talking about active shooters or terrorists, and, functionally who are cut from the same cloth,
So Chris and I were flying up here from Orlando the other day, and it was late. And it's the kind of flight that people get on the plane and immediately fall asleep. And I have a really good friend of mine who's a federal air marshal who he said, listen, never sleep on an airplane. And when he gave me that tip years ago, that stuck with me. And so I'm going to be straight up with you, man. I profile everybody on an airplane. Mm-hmm. Like, you're going to burn big black guy, profiling you. Big white guy, profiling you. Pregnant woman, is she really profile? I profile everybody. I don't care, because I think you have to be aware of your surroundings at the very least. It's no different than going into a restaurant or a movie theater and knowing where the exits are. Understand the people that are around you, the environment that you're in, and be prepared to at least have some kind of knowledge about the situation that you're in. Talk to me about some of the other practical tips that people are going to get from your book.
Sure. So one of the most, I would say, if we start at the beginning, right, what's the most fundamental beginning, of personal security? Paying attention, right? Situational awareness. So I always tell people that, paying attention really is just the prerequisite. I mean, like, I hear so many times people say, I don't really need any training because I pay attention to my environment. But that's just the beginning. You got to know what to look for, right? And the concept here is not just to know what to look for, how to avoid falling into the trap, if you will, of sort of dismissing our natural impulses or our intuition or our radar. And there's a lot of mental games that we play with ourselves that sort of try to override. We say things like, it's probably nothing, it's no big deal. We want that normalcy, which I can talk about. But the idea here is that if we talk about situational awareness, right? So you just mentioned being on an airplane. Everybody looks, well, I would say if you're really paying attention to things, most people have a tendency to observe those around them. I like the idea of don't sleep on an airplane. I can't say that I'm perfect with that. I fly enough that, I'm usually catching some Z's when I can. But I'm a very light sleeper, But the thing is that functionally speaking, I had one of my clients tell me, he says, I always look for my team. And what he meant by that was he's observing people not only for who could be a problem, but thinking to himself, who here would actually take action?
100%.
And, I like that approach. The thing about, simplicity of thought is that on an airplane, what do they always tell you? As soon as you sit down, you go through the safety briefing and they say, hey, pay attention to where your exits are. The nearest one may be behind you, right? Mm-hmm. We just saw this catastrophe or near miss catastrophe in Japan, yeah. Okay, where plane caught on fire. Everyone got out, safely. I would think. I don't know how many injuries there were, but functionally, no one died. Remarkable, because when we actually look at airline crashes, you know, and injuries in airlines that kill people, the vast majority happen on the ground. Yep. And people die by virtue of smoke inhalation because they can't get out of the cabin fast enough. And they usually can't do that for a whole variety of reasons, one of them being that people will always go for their overhead luggage, right? So there's this irrational behavior that occurs, okay, that costs lives. But the thing is, when you're in that aircraft, the standard operating procedure is know where your exits are. So if we apply that same logic to anywhere we go, if you're trying to teach a young person how to have a greater degree of situational awareness, when you take them to a restaurant or you're going to eat with your family, ask your kids, where's the kitchen? You know, just get in the habit of that. Where's the exit other than the front door you walked in?
There's always an exit out the back of the kitchen.
Always through the kitchen. There's always an exit through the, behind stage of a show. You know, the idea here is that most people have been conditioned once again to believe those areas are off limits, right? Well, when we're in an emergency and we're not thinking straight, if we haven't taken that moment even simply to know where our other alternatives are, then our brain goes, the only way out is through the front door, and if the threat is between me and the front door, panic ensues. So the idea here is that simple tactics, simple tools people can take without reading the book even, just hearing this, the obvious things. Teach people to know where their exits are. What are their alternatives? I always just tell people, know your exits, but the reality is you want to know your alternatives. Where do you position yourself? So if you have to fight back, you can, or if you have to get through the door.
That's why you'll always see me on the aisle seat, and the second that I can take off my seatbelt, I do, because, and that's not always when they tell you it is, right? Because if God forbid someone's going to try something, I don't want to jump up, get caught on my belt, and now I'm the target and couldn't react fast enough.
And one of the things I was taught, take your restaurant example. Go into a restaurant and literally treat your eyes like a camera and take a snapshot. Close your eyes. It registers in your brain that is where one of the exits is in this place. It will go away, in time. It's not going to permanently be there.
Sure.
But if something happens, you're now visually aware, which tells your brain that is an exit. More than just looking at it, you actually take a second to take a snapshot.
I like that. Yeah, I like that. And there's a whole lot of other things in this. I talk about from the standpoint of the myth of randomness, for example, that what I call the timeline of violence, okay? So if we look at, and we sort of scientifically break down, how do bad guys perform? How do they go about their attacks? TIME is an acronym, stands for target selection, interviewer intelligence gathering, method of attack, and then escape exploitation. And it's this linear process that they progress through. So easy analogy is like the 9/11 terrorists, right? So 9/11, guys come to the group before the attack. They say, hey, I got a great idea. Let's target the World Trade Center. Okay, so we have target selection. Another one says, let's, fly an airplane into the building. So we have like a proposed method of attack. Well, they don't go for it because inherently there's a high probability of failure in that mission because they haven't vetted their plan. So they enter into this eye of time. And when we're being really specific about what are you looking for? You're trying to recognize indicators of the eye of time, that someone may be trying to tee you up, someone may be following you or approaching you, and there's these dynamics. Now, that gets a little bit more complicated, if you will, when the predator is someone who is a master of camouflage, right? And they use charm and persuasive ability to kind of create opportunities. You have to get really good at reading what's going on there and how to recognize that charm sometimes is something that is a problem and it's a tactic, and how to read whether or not this person could in fact have other intents in mind other than your safety or your benefit. So being able to recognize the indicators of eye of time as the laser focused specifics, usually I break it down into there's only these two kinds of what I call interviews. All right, terrorist attack might be going into intelligence work, meaning surveillance, systematic testing and probing of the target, dress rehearsals, things like that. And all of those are little broader indicators. But the way victimizations occur to most ordinary people is by way of some kind of an interview. So it's an approach or a following, or a pursuit. And that pursuit sometimes is one of the most important indicators. So one of your previous guests that I got the privilege of hearing earlier is phenomenal. Vincent, unbelievable story. But it started off the cop and the stalker. Well, the stalker dynamic is one of the most important and relevant dynamics that 1 in 6 women nowadays throughout the course of their life will have to address. How do you recognize the early stages of that and diffuse that before it ever manifests? And if you find yourself mired in it, how do you deal with it? A lot of those tactics are dealt with in this book, and they've been dealt with in other books as well, which I reference. But the concept is, here's an actionable process. So I hope it's not as specific as maybe we want to get, but I'd say you got to get the book and read it. And the other thing about it is, I mean, a book is tangible, right? So like, if the power's out, you've got a book. You know, if you're not dependent on your Kindle in case there's some kind of grid collapse. I mean, that's why I have a library. I mean, I think that's something that most people don't appreciate.
So I did the same thing, man. I think you're spot on about that. We, at our house, we have a number of books that we've acquired over the years, everything from medicinal plants that in the event of a catastrophic scenario you have, to how to gain access to a clean water supply, to what to do about sanitation. I mean, this is your personal protective device, right? Which is this. Like, this is why I love jujitsu, because you don't always, especially when you travel to certain states where you can't necessarily carry, you can't necessarily have a firearm on you, but you can have this. And the situational awareness is part of the functionality of this tool. And if we don't have that, then we're just asking to become a victim.
Yeah.
Shameless plug.
So, yeah, I mean, I'd say buy the book. You know, this is something that I think is vital. It's gotten great reviews from some very big name people in the industry. You know, folks like obviously Dave Grossman, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, who wrote the foreword, considered it one of the best books he's ever read. Said he wished he would have written it. You know, Joe Navarro, who's a legendary FBI spy catcher, body language expert, folks like that. You can get the book anywhere books are sold. I'd say go to Amazon. I'm still seeking that bestseller list.
There you go.
So buy the paperback on Amazon. Please leave a review. And obviously, if you need to get a hold of me, livereadybook.com is the easiest. It's sort of the landing page for the book. Takes you right to my website and all of the services that we provide.
Brother, thanks for coming up. Thanks for coming on the show. Thanks for the work that you're doing here.
Appreciate you.
Guys, highly recommend the book. Again, I'm only a couple of chapters in, and I'm already sold, and it's absolutely spectacular. So thank you for watching. Thanks for hitting that share button.
We got to go from being lambs to being lions, and this is a great book to do that. And the only thing I want to say is this. One of the most polarizing, aggravating things I ever see on television is when you go to a community, there's a crime, and people go, not in my town. That just tells me you're not ready.
Totally.
Let's be ready, America. Let's be safe.
Any shout outs you want to?
Always, Mom. Love you.
God bless you all, and God bless America.
Live ready.